Last night, the Dallas Cowboys defeated the New York Giants 20-15 on Thursday Night Football. Like we talked about here, it was a little bit of a messy game in different senses for both of these teams, but ultimately, the important thing for the Cowboys is they got the win, and they were able to sort of get themselves back on the right track. Now, this was not a super convincing game necessarily, but ultimately coming off of two very disappointing home losses, the Cowboys were against the Saints and then against the Ravens. For Dallas, it just feels like at least they're back on track to some degree, but there were a lot of real concerns, in my opinion, in this game. They were outgained by the Giants actually as a whole. They only forced the Giants to punt once, so their defense did a pretty good job of bend, don't break, but still would have preferred to see. I don't know. I can't even really pin this on the defense necessarily. I mean, the Giants were able to move the ball unquestionably. This felt like, to me, more so that, only putting up 20 points against the Giants defense that has a good front seven. And that's something that we talked about before. That is the strength of this New York, really, team as a whole, I would argue, is the front seven for the Giants. And they were able to, move the ball decently well, but a couple 3-and-outs, like I mentioned, they ended up being outgained by the Giants altogether. And I think that it is more so about the fact that their offense just wasn't able to necessarily put together sustainable drives as much as the Giants were on the other end, which is another bit of a concern there. The offensive line play is something that I still really do think is an issue for this Cowboys team. You saw, and again, tough front seven, we can acknowledge that, but the likes of Kayvon Thibodeau and Brian Burns and Dexter Lawrence as well in the middle, really causing issues for Dallas's O-line. I thought that specifically on the left side of the offensive line, rookie Tyler Guyton, who the Cowboys drafted in the first round this past year, he sort of got it handed to him for a lot of the night. Ultimately, he had, I think it was 3 flags, 1 sack allowed, a tackle for a loss allowed, I think a couple of those actually, and some pressures. So I think that there are concerns on the offensive line. The Cowboys were at least able to run the ball better in the second half. Now, at the end of the game, when they were sort of trying to milk the clock and the Giants understood that the Cowboys were going to run the ball and it was a lot more obvious in those situations, Cowboys definitely struggled more there. That is to be expected. But, overall, I think that it was just kind of the poor offensive line play and the poor discipline in general. I mean, 11 penalties for the Cowboys in this game, a lot of those on the offensive line as well, but just sort of continued to hurt themselves, and they actually got bailed out, it seemed like, on a couple occasions, specifically early on in the game, in terms of some penalties that sort of went in their favor. It looked like at one point the refs just entirely called a face mask on the wrong team, where it was Bellinger of the Giants who seemed to get grabbed in the face mask, I believe it was DeMarvion Overshown, and then when they actually called the play, they said that it was Bellinger who was in the face mask. I think that was just a little bit of a misspeak there that actually, resulted in a 30-yard swing and negated what would have been a pretty solid Giants drive, sort of ended up killing them there. There was a holding call as well in the red zone that was picked up. Not that I hated it, and not that by any means I think that Giants fans can sit here this morning and say that it was entirely on the refs, but it was more so just sort of bringing up the idea of the referees being involved. It was because the Cowboys didn't really play all that disciplined of a game, and that's something that I think is going to continue to hurt them if they can't correct that. It sounded like behind the scenes as well, according to ESPN, that there really wasn't much celebration in that Cowboys locker room. Didn't feel like it was a convincing performance where, you get back in the win category, which is obviously a good thing coming off of back-to-back losses. But this is a game, especially coming into the year, the Cowboys themselves probably would have figured that they were able to sort of roll over the Giants more significantly than they were. Now, divisional matchup, those are never easy. They actually just came, one Brandon Aubrey field goal kick away from covering, which was kind of a crazy situation there, considering Aubrey up to that point had been 16 of 16 on field goals, 50 yards or more. Ended up missing with about 30 seconds left to sort of blow the cover for anybody who did have money there. So either way here, I don't think that this was a dominant win for the Cowboys. It was a needed one, but I think there are a lot of things to still have questions about with Dallas moving forward, especially considering the fact that they saw some crucial injuries on the defensive side of the ball occur in that second half. First, it was DeMarcus Lawrence, the defensive end / tackle for them, that he ended up going down with a foot injury, was sitting there on the sideline with his cleat off, and it was just reported on within the past 20 minutes from Tom Pelissero of DeMarcus Lawrence is expected to miss multiple weeks with that foot injury that he suffered. On top of that as well, Micah Parsons suffered a high ankle sprain. So it sounds like both of Lawrence and Parsons are going to be out until at least after that bye week for Dallas on week 7, again, according to Tom Pelissero there. So definitely some tough losses. And Dallas, they could definitely use racking up some wins here because their schedule is going to, continue to be more difficult. Now, ultimately, they're going to get Deron Bland at some point back as well, which can be a big boost for this team as well. But a defense that has been a little bit underwhelming, at least in weeks 2 and 3 specifically. This week, playing against the Giants offense that we know they have their own issues in terms of actually being able to put the ball in the end zone. But again, the Giants sort of drove up and down. Now, we're going to be diving into the Giants side of this equation shortly here. But for the Cowboys, again, there's only so much you can come out of this. The bright side is that Dak Prescott, start to finish, did look pretty good, all things considered. 22 of 27, 221 yards, and 2 touchdowns. I thought that he did a much better job of sort of coming out of the gates a little bit more prepared. That was a situation that we saw last week, especially where, the Cowboys these past 2 weeks just let opposing teams jump on them out of the gates, and then it's on the defense to start making stops. Dak Prescott almost gets a little bit of a pass because you can make the argument, well, he never really stood a chance because the defense didn't come to show up. But it's also on him, who is now making $60 million, is the highest paid quarterback in the NFL, that he has to be a tone setter a little bit. And the other guy that needs to be a tone setter is CeeDee Lamb. And that is where you sort of start to build on these positives that we saw CeeDee Lamb sort of back and incorporated into this offense. This was a situation where, of course, coming off of last week when there was that little bit of an outburst on the sideline of CeeDee Lamb yelling at Dak Prescott, that Lamb himself said that he needed to reflect on the type of leader he is, and he came out in this game. The Cowboys were force-feeding him early. He had 5 touches within the first 2 drives, including a halfback toss, essentially, to him. Of course, wide receiver. But they were using him out of the backfield as well. He ended up with 3 carries, and he had a reception out of the backfield. Interesting play there. I believe it was in the 3rd or 4th quarter, where he and Ezekiel Elliott both lined up in the backfield. They motioned Zeke out to the left side, and then it was essentially CeeDee Lamb coming out of that backfield, running a little bit of a curl and getting a catch there. So he finished this game with 7 catches for 98 yards and a touchdown. Still yet to have 100 receiving yards in a game so far this season, but if you include the rushing totals as well, did go over the 100-yard mark. So, you can, I suppose, hold it against him that he didn't catch for 100 yards just yet. But, CeeDee Lamb had his fingerprints all over this. And then it was a little bit more so, I thought, the Giants' defensive breakdown when he did score his touchdown. Now, he very cleanly beat Deonte Banks down the left sideline to get open there and have Dak deliver it on time. It was then just also a horrendous angle taken by Giants safety Tyler Nubin, where he way over pursued to the outside, just giving CD basically the entire middle of the field of an open lane to finish off the job there. Went for a 55-yard touchdown. And even if it was a little bit on the Giants breakdown, I mean, that's just what you need out of your star players, is to capitalize on those opportunities. That hadn't really been the case for the past couple weeks. So seeing him and Dak back on the same page, really encouraging. I would also add as well the fact that Jake Ferguson has, since coming back from injury where he was out week 2 after being injured in week 1, he's put together back-to-back solid weeks for him. It's not like he's going to give you the explosive plays like a CeeDee Lamb, but just having another option to throw to reliably is a big difference maker for this Cowboys offense. And Ferguson, again, 7 catches on 7 targets, 49 yards. It's not like you're getting a ton out of him from an explosive play situation, but just having that reliability, because right now it does feel a little bit CeeDee Lamb or bust. Now, I did mention the running game, that I thought that they got better as the game went on. The offensive line maybe warmed up a little bit more. And Rico Dowell, I mean, it wasn't an incredible performance from him. 11 carries for 46 yards. Still, not great necessarily, but Cowboys, I think that ultimately speaking here, if you can get 4 yards a carry. Zeke in the second half as well had some solid runs for him as well. One of them as well that got called back because of Cooper Beebe, their rookie center, ended up picking a holding penalty. So I think that ultimately speaking, this was a fine game for the Cowboys, and it is a divisional game matchup on the road. So you can't, just because I don't think that the Giants are good, doesn't mean that, you can just sort of roll over the fact that this is a divisional matchup on the road. But I think that ultimately the Cowboys still have a lot of proving to do of themselves, and it only becomes that much more difficult knowing that 2 of your best players on defense are injured for the foreseeable future in Parsons and Lawrence, like I mentioned, already without Deron Bland. I do think that Trayvon Diggs is supposed to be okay. He went to the locker room last night based off of what they call dehydration, so he should be fine long term, but in the time being, I think we're going to need to see a lot more from Dallas's offense to sort of keep them afloat. Next week, they are in Pittsburgh, which is going to be a very difficult matchup to be able to put up points on that defense that I believe is yet to allow more than 10 points in a game. So it's going to be definitely a lot more pressure on Dak and that offense to get themselves going. Pressure on Mike McCarthy as well to make sure that they are doing a good enough job of feeding CeeDee Lamb. I really liked what they were doing with him, using him in the backfield, putting him in different locations as opposed to in week 3 when he was just sort of lining up on the outside and you hope that he can make somebody miss. Get him closer to Dak. You know that the pressure isn't necessarily, or the offensive line protection isn't necessarily great for them, that this is going to have to be sort of the CeeDee Lamb and Dak Prescott show in order for the Cowboys to stay competitive on a regular basis and potentially, keep themselves alive for being in that playoff hunt. But let me know what your thoughts are in the comments section. I do want to look on the other side of this game, talk about the New York Giants, who once again had a very lackluster offensive performance. I did mention that they outgained the Cowboys, so there are positives to take out of this game to some degree, but the frustrations with Daniel Jones continue to build up. I want to dive into that and more, but first we are going to take a quick break. Do not go anywhere. We will be right back.